Hi everyone, you're very welcome to this webinar, and I hope wherever you are that you're sitting with sunshine streaming in through your window. What an amazing afternoon. We have 90 minutes now to have really interesting conversation around the role of the creative youth initiatives in the community. Our task is together to identify some of the gaps that exist in that program, to have a look at what's scalable, to think about maybe some issues that need more targeted attention and some groups, to think about who's being left behind, to look at how we achieve the goal of achieving equity. And then as well as that, to see how this conversation leads us to think about our vision for the future. Creative Ireland is conscious of the fact that not all young people are being catered for, and creative youth is in exactly the same situation. But we hope that our discussions today will help to inform how we can address this. Already, I think you've been introduced to the Mentimeter question, and you've had the chance to answer the first of those. And at various stages during the webinar, you'll have a chance to respond to other questions of a similar nature. What I'd really encourage you to do is to add to your yes or no answer your views, your comments, your suggestions in the chat function. Can I introduce you to the people who are really going to lead and inspire us for the next 90 minutes? Paula Phelan from Music Generation. Paula, you're very welcome. Rachel Coffey from the STAR project, that's the Traveller and Roma project based in Cork. Rachel, you're very welcome. Stephen Tully, an arts project worker in Fimilibase in Ballyfermot. Hi, Stephen, welcome to the panel. And Monica Spencer, who's the coordinator of the local Creative Youth Partnership based in the Limerick and Clare Education and Training Board. Monica, we're really looking forward to hearing your contribution later as well. So we have really rich expertise amongst these people. Expertise that's based both on research they've carried out, but most importantly, on how they have worked creatively and their experience of working creatively with young people. What they're going to do is they're going to showcase for us some of the initiatives. They're going to talk to us about the impact of those programs on the well-being and creativity of young people. And they're going to help us using their lens to reflect and to take stock as a group of people who are interested and committed to the whole concept of creativity in youth activities in the community. So we have about 250, no more, we have 280 people, I think, registered for today, which is an extraordinary level of commitment and interest. And I think it reflects what's happening nationally, which is that there is a kind of a renewed conversation and discussion about what it is that young people are entitled to culture, their right to culture, their right to creativity. So I think that's really inspiring, and thank you all for devoting and giving your lives and your commitment to this whole area. I should have said at the outset who I am. Catherine Byrne is my name. I have spent my lifetime in the field of education and the arts. I'm still fully engaged, even though I've formally retired. It's been my lifetime's passion. And at the moment, I'm very involved in a project around creativity in the education system in conjunction with the Byrne School of Art. And we're looking forward to seeing some of this discussed in a citizens' assembly, which will take place in the next year or so. So amongst us today, then, there are artists and art organizations, there are teachers, there are representatives from youth organizations, from local authorities, from county councils, from the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, and we have policymakers from a wide range of government departments, including education, children and youth, arts and culture. I'm going to come back for a second just to mention the chat function again, because in these days of virtual meeting, It's great to be able to meet your colleagues across a virtually crowded room, or to renew acquaintances, or to build your relationships. So make sure from the very beginning to start this process of connecting with each other, and most importantly, from our perspective, commenting on what's happening and asking questions. Because everything that happens and every comment you make will be harvested into a wider evaluation and assessment that's taking place of creative youth. You'll also find that the chat function will provide you with really useful information and links that will be created during the session by creative youth, but also by yourselves. The format then is, and I'll be finishing soon, is a 10-minute presentation from each of our speakers, a panel discussion then with questions and answers, and at the very end, I'm inviting the panel to really leave you with something to take away and to leave our policymakers and those who provide services for young people in the community with things to think about. Briefly then, the purpose of the Creative Youth Plan is to enable the creative potential of every young person in Ireland. At the heart of the programme is a conviction that both knowledge and creativity and culture are all equal partners in the lives of our children, from the earliest years right through to third and further education. The three words that I suppose really influence the programme are the notion of access, inclusion, and outcomes, sustainable outcomes that really will make a difference for children and young people. It's important to say as well that Creative Ireland's programme so does more than the Creative Youth Programme around the increasing of access to creative activities. For example, all 31 local authorities are involved in enhancing and increasing engagement in every community, and many of those initiatives are targeted at young people. Another example is Crinan and Og, Ireland's Day of Free Creative Activities for Young People. This year, that's taking place on the Saturday, the 12th of June, and that's delivered by local authorities. And then we have the National Creativity Fund. Half of those projects, half of the 30 projects, are focused on children and young people. And as I said again, we're conscious that much more needs to be done, or creative youth is conscious of much more needs to be done. And so our discussion today is going to take us towards that, I think. It's a broad consultation that is happening. We've had 3 events, this one today, one on Tuesday around the education initiatives. And most importantly, there's been a consultation with young people so that their voices will inform and influence how things move forward. The main conference around this consultative process takes place on the 13th of May. Check the website. Already, I think there are hundreds of people who have registered, so make sure you don't miss your opportunity. I just want to say finally that I think the pandemic has really had a huge impact on our young people, and probably it has been most difficult for our young, disadvantaged people, those who are excluded, those who are on the margins. We're going to hear, I'm sure, from our panel about the impact of COVID, but also I think I'm very optimistic and hopeful that in spite of COVID, we're going to discover that they have found ways as well of enhancing the creativity of young people during this very difficult time, hopefully, which we're moving away from. So without saying another word, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Paula Phelan. And I'm going to leave Paula to tell you a little bit about herself and look forward, Paula, to hearing you.
Thank you, Catherine, and it is so lovely to be here. My name is Paula Phelan, and I work for Music Generation National Development Office. My role there is one of Head of Quality, Support and Development. But I suppose underneath all of that and underpinning all of that, I'm a musician, I'm an educator, and I have a passionate belief and drive to create opportunities for children and young people to live a fulfilled musical and creative life. Music Generation is Ireland's national performance music education programme. It began programming in 2011 and was born out of the feasibility study by our parent company, Music Network. We're funded by U2, the Ireland Funds, and the Department of Education. We have synergy and are part of the Creative Youth Pillar. And as a flagship programme, our ambition is to fulfil national expansion this year. Right now, and at the moment, we're working in 28 areas across the country. Prior to COVID, we were working with over 45,000 children and young people annually, most of those children and young people engaging with us on a weekly basis. We have over 500 musician educators in our workforce. And those phenomenal musician educators work to deliver performance music education within school environments, but always outside of the school curriculum and in what we may consider as community settings. We work in partnership, and organisationally across the country, we are supported by education and training boards and county councils. Each music generation area is diverse. Each music generation area is tasked with meeting children and young people where they're at with their local need in their community. So no two music generation look or sounds the same. And every music generation area is led by a dynamic music development officer. So I thought what we might do is I thought we might have a little look at the work together. It's always a really nice thing to do to look at the work. We're going to play a clip in just a minute. And just to set some context, this clip is from the great work of Music Generation Cork City and their partnership with GMC Beats, Gary McCarthy, and those that work in the Cabin Studio. The Cabin Studio is placed in the north side of Cork City, where Music Generation Cork City do most of their work in Harbour Hill. They work with children and young people through hip hop, through rap, very much placing the child's voice at the very, very centre of what they do. I don't want to say too much more about it. I think we'll just watch it and check in together afterwards. So we'll take a look now.
Alright, girl, how's it going? Grand, girl. Did you hear the boys' new song? Yeah, it's unreal, isn't it? I know, it's decent. I think that's them over there. Oh my god. Do you like what we do? Yeah, boy. Wanna be in the crew? Yeah, boy. Wanna hear something new? Yeah, boy. Wanna blow off the roof? Yeah, boy. Do you like what we do? Yeah, boy. Wanna be in the crew? Yeah, boy. Wanna hear something new? Yeah, boy. Wanna blow off the roof? Yeah, boy. Jumping on the track and rhyming to the beat. It's Michael on the mic to move your hands and feet when you're on the bike. You lose control, but when I'm on mine, you better get off the road. I'm always with the boys, I'm never on my own, but you can't call me cause I broke my phone. Started rapping when I was only 7, rock so many crowds by the age of 11. Do you like what we do? Yeah, boy. Wanna be in the crew? Yeah, boy. Wanna hear something new? Yeah, boy. Wanna blow off the roof? Yeah, boy. Do you like what we do? Yeah, boy. Wanna be in the crew? Yeah, boy. Wanna hear something new? Yeah, boy. Wanna blow off the roof? Yeah, boy. Jimmy's on the mic in the sun, I be chillin'. I'm Superman, but I can turn to a villain when I start to rhyme. Beats I be killing. I can never lose because I'm always winning. I'm from Farnery, it's the place to be, where the boys are cool and the girls are mean. You'll always hear a motorbike going around the green, passing by my house while I'm trying to go to sleep. Boom, boom, they're going down the back hallway. I be writing sick raps, chilling at home. I'm a mini Slim Shady. I had a mic that a rattle in my hand as a baby. Boys wanna battle me, I think they're crazy. You can chase me, but you'll never beat me. I'm well connected like Wi-Fi. I riddle you with raps, it's a drive-by. Do you like what we do? Yeah, boy. Wanna be in the crew? Yeah, boy. Wanna hear something new? Yeah, boy. Wanna blow off the roof? Yeah, boy. Do you like what we do? Yeah, boy. Wanna be in the crew? Yeah, boy. Wanna hear something new? Yeah, boy. Wanna blow off the roof? Yeah, boy.
It always makes me smile every time I see it, and I've seen it so many times. I thought what we might do in considering that piece is focus in a little bit on the word community. We know that community is more than simply place or space. For children and young people, perhaps, there's no line between inside the school environment and outside the school environment. Perhaps it's all their community as they see it. In Music Generation, we strive to place children and young people at the very centre of the work that we do with our musician educators. We have the ambition to enable a musical and creative life for children and young people. So we need to consider the possible breadth and depth of what a child's community actually is. What is their version of their community? In Music Generation, community is possibly a social unit with commonalities. Place and space, whether physical or virtual, may form part of that, but not in a boundaried way. In Music Generation, we consider those commonalities by the purpose that binds us. That might be the purpose that drives us to create with children and for children and young people. It might be the purpose to bring about change for children and young people. It may be place, perhaps it's practice, and it certainly often is circumstances. Music Generation seeks out those communities, those places, those people, those spaces with a shared purpose for children and young people. So what does that all really mean for the young people that are involved with us, or for indeed for those brilliant young musicians in the cabin? For Music Generation, it may mean endeavouring to work to try and dissolve perhaps the adult-led version of community and seek to discover more about meaningful communities for children and young people. In practical terms right now, that means a 360-degree approach to programming that embraces the bringing together of those with a shared purpose for children and young people. The very best of musician educators, the very best and dedicated youth workers, school staff, friends, siblings, parents, families, and mentors. There is no doubt that COVID has drastically impacted our work. Generally, we have found that the work that was traditionally placed in spaces outside of the school environment has been easier to transfer online. By that, I mean our work that takes place in what we might describe as community settings, hub settings, small group instrumental tuition and vocal tuition, or our work within our creative centres and networks across the country. We could have decided this time last year when the pandemic hit, and we were all a bit shook, to focus our energy completely on those settings. But that would have been to ignore the possible breadth and depth of what a child and young person needs from us and needed from us during the last year. I want to show you another clip in a minute. This clip is a video to promote a series of live streamed performance opportunities for children and young people engaging with us in Limerick City. This clip shows the musician educators of Music Generation Limerick City and their creative response to reaching out to children and young people in the breadth of their community. So we might take a little look at that right now.
We're back at it again, cause all of they're panicking again, panicking again. again. We're back at this again. Oh Lord, they're panicking again. Panicking again. They're panicking again. Intentionality again. What was that? We're back at this again. What was that again? We're back at this again. What was that again? We're back at this again. Oh Lord, they're panicking again. Panicking again. They're panicking again. Intentionality again. What was that again?
So they're just an example of a creative response to reach children and young people in the breadth of their community, remaining very, very true to the values of music generation, of diversity and creativity. I'm going to finish up now and leave you with one final thought, or it's really a question, I suppose, or a consideration, or perhaps a provocation. And that is, does our work, our version of community, match the version held by the children and young people that we work with? And what does that all look like post-COVID in terms of a recovery plan for children and young people that places creativity at its core? Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Paula. What a start. I'm sure if I could see all your faces out there, you're smiling. There were beautiful videos, really brought right into our rooms and our homes the excitement of seeing young people involved in creative activities and just getting access to in this instance. The questions as well, I think, are questions we'll come back to in the discussion. But just to say thank you, Paula, and now I'm going to move straight over to Rachel from Cork.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. My name is Rachel Coffey, and I'm the Traveller Education Worker on the STAR project here in Cork City. The STAR project is a pilot programme that it came out of the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy in 2017. And I suppose it's just around addressing the barriers for young travellers in education. And I suppose as well, it's just supporting the community and things as well. Just a little bit around my own background. I come from a traveller background myself. I've just completed my degree in youth work last year in UCC. So I suppose even though I'm an education worker, I'm really a youth worker at heart. And I feel education and creativity that comes hand in hand. And it's something that I always bring into my work when I'm working with young travellers. And I suppose as well, I've done a lot of voluntary Traveller Pacific youth work. And it was through that program that a lot of our creative projects came from. And I suppose for me, the message I want to get today, creativity gives marginalised groups a voice. And through the work I've done with young travellers, it has given them a voice, whether it's through art, through cooking, through other projects, it gives them the voice, And I suppose I just have some slides here. I'm just going to quickly go through them. Sorry, no. Yeah, so I'm just going to start here. So I suppose my role really is I work with 14 pilot schools across Cork City, and we also have a Roma education worker. So I suppose my role really is working with young people in schools, working with my community outside it, working with parents, because I suppose we all know that travellers, the disadvantage, the discrimination, we see it every day. And I suppose it was really highlighted in COVID, and particularly here in Cork City when there was an outbreak, it was in the media and things like that. So for our young people, it's really difficult, because they don't access a lot of youth services, to drop out of school early and stuff like that. So I suppose for me, I really trying to push with keeping them in school, doing youth work and using stuff like this, to be able to give them that voice, So I suppose initially with Creative Ireland, I did a course a couple of months back on creative storytelling, and I literally loved doing that because of the process of it, And I think it'd be great for any young people to do, because they're telling their story in that safe space, and again it's about giving them the voice, So I suppose the slides I have here is just there's rights like for young people here in Ireland. So like these are some of them like from the Children's Ombudsman. So I suppose like for me with like creativity and young people and art and stuff, I have young people like that having access to hot water. You know, they haven't got access like to a proper home. So like a lot of my young people I work with like live in overcrowded like calling sites and things. And I suppose like trying to get young people in the door to education and be creative when they're living like this, like this is like their outside external. It's very difficult like to kind of build them up and build up their self-esteem, you know. So I might get my next slide moved because my clicker isn't working, sorry. Yeah. So I suppose for me and young people and art and like education, you can't like get young people, like especially marginalized groups, up the ladder unless you meet them where they're at. So I suppose I have this up as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I have young people then no basic warm, no basic homes, you know. And I suppose like for me, and I suppose for everybody working with young people is meeting them where they're at, you know, and understanding their background, understanding their living conditions, you know. So for me, like it's really like relationship building even before we can like even move on to the creativity, you know. So I suppose I put that up as well just to kind of highlight like how I worked, you know. I'd work off this because like for my young people, I need to meet them where they're at. And I understand them. Like I grew up myself in Cork City being a traveller, you know, so I understand their needs and like what's going on for them, you know. Could I get my next slide moved, please? Yeah. So I suppose like just like around like the effects of racism, you know, and I suppose even like during COVID, like and like getting devices out to our young people, like supporting them like with phone credits and stuff like that. It was so difficult to even get them online, like to access like school and stuff, you know. And I suppose like it's really about like stripping it back to young people and with the community, you know. Like the effects of racism and the older generation of the traveller community, like it's shocking. You have like women, grown women telling you like they were traumatized from their own school experience. So I suppose like even like with like older travellers, like trying to get like young people to do like homework, having the space and stuff like that, it kind of stems back to like institutional racism, like that the whole community like looked at like years and years ago. And like it kind of goes back to like intergenerational like trauma. And like we see that now today, you know, we had young people like 30 years ago in the back of the classroom with colouring pages. I came across 3 young travellers last year in a classroom watching Netflix, you know. So like this is kind of like 360, like, and I suppose my role in this, like, it's kind of like trying to like break that cycle, trying to keep them like in school, like, and giving them a voice. So next slide, please. So yeah, so I suppose just like through my work, like with like young travellers in education, like I don't know, can people see the little game? Like I make up like little like activities around feelings and stuff. Cause like it's great again, it goes back to creativity and it's giving the young people like a voice, just something simple like that. And like I used this in a needs assessment last year. And like this was all coming from like the young people, the name calling, like the literacy levels are like really low. We've reduced timetables, we've kids like in 6th class getting homework for junior infants, you know. So I suppose I kind of wanted to kind of highlight that as well, like because participation for like young travellers is difficult for them because like if they're going into school and they're treated this way, they're scared to go into youth services in case like that they're going to be discriminated against more, you know. So I suppose even here today it's just around like, and I really liked what Catherine touched on, like equity and the right to culture, you know. Those 2 words like really stood out when Catherine said it to me, like in we should be pushing for that, like we should be pushing like for equity, not just for young travellers, like all young people like across the board, you know. And again, like the right to culture, like every young person in Ireland, regardless of who they are, they have a right to their culture and they have a right to practice it and they like should not be discriminated against it, you know. So just the next slide, please. So yeah, these are just kind of another couple of findings again, just around like education, you know, and it's kind of shocking like that the numbers are so low for having like young travellers doing leaving cert. The numbers like in even 3rd level, it's crazy to know that we've only so many like travellers going through when there's like so much like creative like young people within our community. But again, like it's the barriers like that come, you know, kind of for moving forward. So if I just next slide, please. So yeah, so I suppose 2017 like recognised traveller ethnicity, and I suppose like I put these 2 pictures up. A little 9-year-old traveller girl made these one night. We were having a party to celebrate traveller ethnicity, and like on that poster she had, this is for travellers only. like giving like young people these spaces, like to like celebrate who they are. For me, that's creative. Like that, like gave that young girl a voice. She went out, hung it outside the door, and she was like, "Yeah, this is our day." Like, and they were able to like celebrate it, you know. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So yeah, again, like I kind of highlighted it at the start. For me, like in my work, like creativity, it gives young people voices, whether if it's like writing words down on like a board, whether if it's like putting a little book together, like around like their culture and identity, you know, it gives them like a voice, you know. And like it says here, like on this poster, like it's kids, like, and we brought a group of little girls from 5 up to 10 to UCC to do this project. Like the kids like said it themselves, like one bay, one family. There's potholes, like it's unsafe. They went to the house, you know. Like that gave those young people that day like their voice. And I think like as adults, like we advocate all the time for young people, but like something like this is so powerful, like, and it kind of goes back again like to the creativity and like their culture and like their own identity. So I might just move on to my next slide, please. So yeah, so I suppose I popped up like just a couple of resources here, like with young travellers, again, it kind of goes back like to the culture and stuff again. And I suppose I put up some resources there as well, like there's a couple of like traveller specific books that were made like by community groups. Like there's another game as well just around the Cant language. So travellers have their own language. It's usually called like the Cant or the Gammon. And like I developed like workshops like with like a young person, like putting this together, like guessing like the words, you know. So like here in Cork City is probably different up the country. Like Byrne, Feen, it's looked at as like a north side like slang word, but it's actually like travellers like traditional language, you know. And like even something simple like that, getting a young person like to develop the switch chat to deliver it to their peers, like it's amazing, you know. I might move on to my next slide. So yeah, again, these are just a couple examples. Again, kind of like creativity, it always goes back to their culture with our young people. Like they embrace it like so much. And I think if there is like spaces like this for like young travellers, like to come and do traveller specific youth work, you know, like give them that space, like maybe if it was like once a week, because they actually like cherish it, you know. And I suppose you can just see it even in the pictures, like all their creativity is their reality, and it kind of always goes back to that. So they have like their stables, they have their horses, you know. And I think that's amazing, like that they're like so in tune with their own identity, and like this is what they do through their work. And I suppose like it speaks for them, you know. It's like not like adults coming and speaking for them. They're not doing something like they didn't want to do. Like this is stuff they're coming up with themselves, like, and I just think it's powerful because like travelers, they don't participate on like many levels, especially our young people. And like getting them to do like projects like this, like it's amazing. Because like I suppose like being like the traveller education worker here in Cork City and COVID, like I'd love to be able to do like more projects, even like with Creative Ireland in the schools. But unfortunately with COVID, like everything is kind of paused. So I suppose the COVID has really like impacted like the work we do with young travellers. And I suppose it impacted the whole community as well, because like everyone has seen like recently in the news, like travellers, like they're so marginalised, they're literally waiting to get vaccinated because they're living up on top of each other, you know. So I suppose like COVID had a huge impact like on our young people. So I'm just going to go on to my last slide, I think it is. So yeah, I suppose creativity again, like this is like Chloe, she's like her traveller doll. So we got this doll 2 years ago from One World, the One World organization up in Galway. So like this doll was made in South Africa by a group of women. So these dolls like came like to Ireland. There's a Syrian family that has a doll up the country, and we were given a doll. So she's like the doll persona. So she's given to community groups. We got her like for a little girls group, and the girls named her Chloe. So this is Chloe, our traveller doll. Chloe has a folder and it has like all her stories, how she cooked with her grandmother. She lives in a trailer, you know. And I suppose the purpose of this doll is about bringing her to groups and primary schools to circle time to break down the barriers, like, and just kind of like look at different cultures and stuff. And like, even this doll now, like, she has a name and she has brothers and sisters, and like, she's living like in the Halton site. And like, all small little primary school girls like came up with this, like, then they were like amazed and blown away with it, like that somebody actually came in like with a doll that's going to be a traveller, and like they were delighted she had like little earrings and things. But like things like this, like giving like those young girls a voice, like through a doll, like something like this is so simple, but it's so powerful. Like imagine like bringing this into like primary school now to a group of young people, and just like Chloe doing her story and a young traveller like doing it with her, you know. So I suppose there are a couple of the projects like I've worked on. I really hope like for the summer holidays we might like get a little few like level threes and we can get some work done with our young people. But as of now, like it's kind of paused. But I suppose like I'm kind of really excited like to hear the rest of the presentations today, and I'm going to take a lot of learning from it. And thanks a million for having me here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. That was absolutely inspiring again. And you really brought us into a kind of new spaces and new things to think about, like identity, equity, you know. And I think that is one of the big kind of themes that's going to run through this entire session, is how do we achieve equity? How do we achieve inclusion? And I think the impact of COVID as well, you highlighted that very well, and the need for breaking down barriers. And then the simplicity, but the power of tools, creative tools, to really help inform how children perceive and relate and link to each other. Beautiful presentation. Thank you again. And now I'm going to move straight on to Stephen. And Stephen is going to take us into the world, I think, of theatre. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and very big thanks to Paula and Rachel so far. It's been really, really interesting stuff. Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of information on myself first. My name is Stephen Tully, and I'm working out in Fimilibase at the moment in Ballyfermot. And as Catherine said, I am going to talk a little bit about the work we've done with Youth Theatre Ireland and setting up the first Youth Theatre in Ballyfermot. So I'll give you a little bit of background on myself and on Fimilibase first. So myself, I've been involved in the arts for as long as I can remember. It's kind of the only language I've ever fully understood ever since I was a kid. And it's something that I take with me now that when I work with my own practice. And whether it was visual arts, whether it was music, whether it was creative writing, whether anything creative, it was always my comfort zone. It was always something that I felt I had a voice in, and that I felt that I kind of belonged to. And I think it's really, really important to, especially from a young person's point of view now, is that to kind of have that language for them, and to always have that option. And what we do out here in Fimilibase is it's basically essentially a one-stop shop for the community from age 0 upwards. Like we have our early years section, our creche looks after anything from 0 to 5. We have our youth and community team where ages 6 and up, and we have a child and parent section as well, which is the really intensive work with young people and their parents and all that type of support. It's amazing work. And I came in about 2 years ago as an arts project worker, and that was specifically to come in and facilitate the arts programs and to deliver anything from a bit of painting to our film programs that we did with our transition year students working with the schools, and anything in between that involved any kind of arts delivery. And that slowly increased to doing more kind of intimate one-to-one spaces with supports for young people who maybe didn't really or didn't really fit into or weren't comfortable with group spaces or big group spaces or needed more intensive support. And we've been doing that for a while as well, which was fantastic, and some really great work from there, and some great relationships built and some great supports. And obviously that's all changed now, but I'll get onto that now with the results of the pandemic. I suppose what we've done since last year is we've been trying to set up a youth theatre in Ballyfermot. The first one, it's just that there hasn't been a youth theatre in Ballyfermot, and we just thought it was such a great location and such a great need there for youth theatre in Ballyfermot. So last year, actually before last year, we started putting together plans, and we had a set to go, and we were going to visit the schools. We were going to bring out some taster workshops. We were going to basically just start the recruitment process to set up the the youth theatre and hold it in Fimilibase. And of course, the pandemic hit just as we were about to roll out our plans and visit the schools and do all those lovely workshops and stuff, which set us back. But I suppose even going back a little bit further, my own introduction to youth theatre, I'd never been involved in youth theatre as a kid. My closest involvement to it was film and writing for film and TV and acting and you know, the more technical side of things with cameras and lighting and editing and that. But when I was first introduced to youth theatre, it was actually as an adult, and about 2 years ago when I went to do some training through Fimilibase and with Youth Theatre Ireland. I did a 3-day workshop as an introduction of youth theatre facilitation, and it was amazing. I fell in love with it right away, and to see this environment and to apply it to my own practice and to see the potential for what a young person could get from this space. It was basically walking into a room where there was no such thing as a wrong answer. There was, not only was I being not being judged for making any mistakes or trying anything new, I was encouraged, and it opened up a world of potential in terms of facilitation and what a youth theatre space could bring to our young people in Ballyfermot. So that just, it lit a fire under me to crack on and work really closely with Youth Theatre Ireland and work with the guys in Fimilibase just to get this space going. Now, as I said before, unfortunately, when the pandemic rolled in, we weren't able to kind of kick off as soon as we wanted. Everything was kind of put on hold, but we went back to the drawing board a little bit, and we decided that we would kind of go ahead with it anyway and bring it straight onto remote facilitation, which was exciting. It was new. It was very different, but it was going to be something we wanted to get it out there and get it to the young people in any way, shape, or form that we could. So we did an online recruitment process. We held a couple of little Zoom workshops, and it was very new for me, and it was very new for the young people as well, because they were, a lot of the young people that we reached out to had never done youth theatre before. So it was a great reaction for them to come into that new space and to give it their all in this kind of new environment that we found ourselves in, and for myself as a facilitator. But the results were fantastic. Like they really did. You could see that they wanted it. You know, they just wanted to be in that space. They wanted to have that forum for their creativity and their expression. And then after a couple of initial workshops, we got that little break last year where we were able to go out to the schools very briefly. And we tried to basically pitch the ideas to them now, and it was tricky as well. We couldn't really do workshops and that type of thing. But we had to do very kind of distance, elevator pitch for the concept, really. But it was great to get out to the schools and even just let them know that it was there for them, and if they wanted it, they could avail of it at any time. And then in the meantime, I actually was able to take part in the Arts Train program through Youth Theatre Ireland, which was the drama facilitation program. And that was held completely online, where it would usually be in person. But that in itself was kind of fantastic, because it gave us this whole new skill set for facilitating young people online, which is where we find ourselves now. And the work that we've been able to do since in an online space has just been fantastic. Like even from Youth Theatre, credit to them themselves for being able to hold that training piece solely online, and all the other online, like all the youth theatres have gone online now. And like, I suppose we're unique in the sense that we've only ever existed online, so our young people haven't even met each other in person yet, which is kind of, we do joke about it every now and then that it's kind of crazy, and they are dying to meet each other. But the fact that they're there every week and they are logging into Zoom and they are asking to do more, and it's just fantastic. It's so encouraging. So it's exciting that when we actually do get back into the room and do that work, it's gonna, the relationships are there, the foundations are there. You have that level of trust, you have that level of care and safety. So it's gonna absolutely bloom when we do finally get to go back into a room. And the online thing as well, I know it's been very easy for a lot of people to, you know, get a little bit down about it and feel it like they're a little bit sick of it maybe. But we've found that it's really evolved our practice and our facilitation methods. Like our youth theatre space now is not, is not just a youth theatre space. It's turned into so much more. It's turned into, one week we might do a creative writing workshop. We might do just a check-in space. Like it's been so nice and so comfortable for the guys to come on, and it's led to so many more things, I think, just out of pure necessity and out of having basically no other choice to do it. But it's just opened up a whole new world, and I think it's something that should be maintained as opposed to discarded after the pandemic is whenever the pandemic goes. I think it's going to give us so many more options to do like a mixture of in-person and online stuff. I think it's a fantastic tool to retain and just to have in our back pockets, just in case, 1 week maybe the whole group can't show up or whatever, and you can still hold a little online thing. It gives you that possibility to always reach your young people. So I guess that's just a kind of a way of saying that we are established now. We recently got affiliated with Youth Theatre Ireland. That was a process that we were working on during the pandemic as well. And it's been amazing. The support from those guys out there, the work that they've done with us has just been absolutely fantastic. And it's just great to see now where it goes in the future. And if we get that continued support, it'll be fantastic when we get back into the room. And I think it'll be important that the support, once we do get the kids back in the room, is that it's going to be a huge readjustment for them as well. So they will just need that guidance and that support as well, and just to be brought back into the space, brought back into the real world. So if that makes sense. But it has been fantastic, and youth theatre itself has just opened up so many possibilities for working with our young people, and I just can't wait to do more with it. It's going to be really exciting. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Stephen. In particular, thank you for highlighting the challenges of trying to work in a new space, which you have been over the last 2 years, particularly when one of those was so dominated by COVID. And I found it interesting as well, the way in which you have talked about the learning to facilitate online, and the potential and possibility of online work in the future. Also the notion that you work in a setting which is a one-stop shop, and the potential then for expanding creative activities across all the activities that go on there. So thank you very much. And then finally, we move on to Monica. You're very welcome, Monica, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. It's great to be here and to see the event so well attended. And thanks to the previous speakers, because it's at platforms like this that we get to share news on each other's work and learn from each other. I'm here to speak to you about the Local Creative Youth Partnership, which is based at Limerick and Clare Education and Training Board, with particular emphasis today on youth voice and the voice of the child. I myself have spent a lifetime working in the arts. I started off in youth theatre also, Stephen, a long time ago. And since then I've worked in venue management, festival curation, dance and theatre production, and a lot of different projects, public art and so on. But I would always have had cultural rights and equality of access on my radar in my approach to my work. So I feel really honoured at this stage in my life to be involved in the rollout of such a new and dynamic programme with those very values at its core. So I'm just going to start off by giving you a tiny bit of background into the establishment of the Local Creative Youth Partnerships. We are, of course, part of the Creative Youth family, and listed in the Creative Youth Plan, launched some years ago. So in 2018, Creative Ireland issued an open call nationally to the ETB network, and 3 pilots were selected from that open call, ourselves in Limerick and Clare being one, and also Kerry ETB and Laois Offaly ETB. So the 3 of us are now up and running as 3 pilot Local Creative Youth Partnerships. I began work in midway in 2019 as coordinator here, and my colleagues started that year also. Deirdre Enright is the coordinator in Kerry, and Pat Wallace in Laois Offaly. So the pilot programme is due to run in line with the Life of the Creative Ireland programme up to the end of 2022. Let's hope we see it exist beyond that time. So the core values as a starting point that that got us going really in terms of our approach to establishing the Creative youth partnerships, we drew on the principles set out in the Creative Youth Plan, which says that the voice of children and young people should be heard in both the development and delivery of the programmes. And in Limerick and Clare ETB's most recent youth work plan, promoting the participation of young people in the design, delivery and evaluation of services to give them a voice to influence decisions in their projects and services is very clearly stated. So certainly youth voice is to the fore in the policy of both those parent organisations for the local creative youth partnerships. So our policy and programme then is nestled in between those two ideologies. Just briefly on our remit, certainly privileging the voice of the child and young person, which I'll be talking about for the rest of my 10 minutes, is to the fore of all of our work. It's very important that we stick to working in and out of schools community context. We do not want to duplicate the work of creative schools, so we work with partners in youth and community settings. Our target groups are young people living in socioeconomic disadvantage, and we have a particular remit to work with migrant communities. We work in partnership with youth and cultural stakeholders. And over my entire life of working in the arts, which is fairly extensive, I cannot explain how separate those two worlds have been and how much I have noticed the difficulty of connecting the world of youth and community on the one hand and arts and culture on the other. I do think we're in a new wave of acknowledging the need for both of those sectors to come together. Certainly, local creative youth partnerships are playing their part in that role. But I think there's a great hunger at the moment in arts and culture to connect more with youth and community bodies, and that's very healthy and encouraging to see. We're also charged with making the work of the young people highly visible, where appropriate, obviously. And the age range that we work with is young people between the ages of 0 and 25. This is just a slide that shows a page from our own Limerick and Clare strategic plan, which will be launched in the next weeks. Again, the 4 key goals that we build our programme on are voice of the child, a partnership with our stakeholders in youth and culture. We adopt a rights-based approach and always strive for quality in our work and, again, visibility where appropriate. We've worked very closely since the get-go with Hub na Nóg. We've undergone quite an extensive amount of training. I myself have done that training on a number of occasions. Our artists and creative tutors have done that training to really get a grasp of the methodology, the ideology, and I suppose the political international framework around rights of the child in terms of incorporating that into all of our work. So when I started off working almost 2 years ago now, I decided to start off the programme by consulting with as many young people as possible. So to date, I've met 340 young people in 30 different locations around Limerick and Clare, mostly in youth clubs and youth centres. I would have met some young people in schools, even though we don't work in schools. Sometimes in rural settings in particular, a school is the only place where you can meet people, young people together, and we do work in after schools clubs and school completion programmes. I would have met young people in community centres and also in direct provision centres and in disability services. So the actual methodology, so it's all very well to talk about having the voice of the child in our policy, but how does it actually work on the ground? So when I go into a setting and meet a group of young people, I first of all introduce the local creative youth partnership and explain that it is a government initiative, which often comes as a surprise. I acknowledge the young people's contribution to the work of this new programme through their participation in the consultation and the fact that they're helping me to do my job, which they're always very happy to hear. And then very importantly, I explain that whatever they say, that the opinions that they offer should, where possible, reflect the outcome of a creative programme, possibly in their youth setting or in another location. And of course, this is very much in line with the Lundy method. Then I ask 3 very simple questions. What kinds of creative things do young people like to make and do, go to see, and try out? And sometimes it's a little difficult for young people to really get going on this. So I use markers, large sheets of paper, And I always prompt them with the word creativity and ask them, what do they think that means? And again, like Stephen said, there is no right or wrong answer, and they really like to hear that. And once it gets flowing, we get all sorts of suggestions as to what creativity means to them. I'm showing two little pictures here. One is of a wreath making program in Kilrush in County Clare, where I did one of my first consultations. I'd met a group of young people there who were quite reticent, even though they'd done a lot of visual art with Clare Youth Service in that setting over the years. They were a little, I think, afraid of suggesting what they like to do. They identified going for day trips and excursions as something that they wanted to do, go to the beach and maybe visit a gallery. So I went off and came back to their youth worker and said, look, maybe we could take a trip to Galway or Cork. We can go visit a beach. We can bring for some food and we can have a cultural experience as well. So she thought this was a great idea. And about a week later, she came back and said, the young people have thought about this and what they really want to do. This was about November. What they really want to do is they want to make wreaths for the graves of their loved ones for Christmas. It's one of the most moving responses I've ever had. So we've done that 2 years in a row in Kilrush, and the young people make wreaths. They absolutely love it. But the really interesting part is that while they're engaged in that activity, they talk freely and openly about the people who have died, about bereavement, and about all sorts of issues that affect them, their emotions. Similarly, the next little picture there of the teddy bears, St. Mary's Park, which holds the unenviable status of being Ireland's most deprived community according to the Public Indices of Deprivation. I had worked there a long time on my own before I took up this position, so I knew the community, and I went in to meet a group of young people, I'd say aged about 10 to 13, and like that I suggested, they respond to creativity, but they were very slow in recommending or suggesting anything they would like to do, so that I prompted, which I would normally not do. I said, what would you like to make a little film? No, would you like to do some painting? So they weren't interested in anything like that. And then one little young boy jumped up and said, can we make teddies for our baby brothers? So they all bought into this, and here are the teddies that went to the baby brothers last Christmas. We work with Limerick Childcare Committee and County Clare Childcare Committee. In approaching the work with both of these childcare committees, we ran 2 conferences in 2019. In Mary Immaculate College, Limerick, we ran a conference exploring movement and creative movement and dance for babies in childcare settings. And in Ennis, in the same year, we had a conference on storytelling with very young children. Both of these events were really enthusiastically greeted by about 50 childcare practitioners in total, and they're all very keen to take this kind of work further. We ran a festival last year. Not that young people were actually asking for a festival, but the content of that festival was something that we took from our consultation process. For example, a lot of young boys in particular were keen to explore maritime culture. One group actually made a boat, Roig and crew made a boat last year. And we had that lovely Elan heritage boat come into Kilrush Marina, and there were workshops on the boat and on the quayside and so on. And that happened at level 3. A Day in the Life of Rathkeale is one of our most successful projects to date. I think it's because it is absolutely embedded in child voice. So in October 2019, a photographer took 20 young girls out onto the streets of Rathkeale and just let them loose with his cameras, very expensive cameras. The results were fantastic. They had an exhibition in their local community centre, and then we took that exhibition on their instruction, on the young people's instruction, into Limerick City Gallery of Art, the People's Museum, and actually there are still some of those pieces hanging on exhibit today in Perry Square, Limerick, if anybody wants to have a look if you're in Limerick. I think the interesting thing about this particular project is that it came from Youth Voice at the very beginning as a suggestion, and the end result, the exhibition, is so it speaks so much of the eye, the view of the young people of their community. That's just a page which gives some of the feedback, a page from our strategic plan, which gives an indication of the kinds of things young people suggest are creative. It includes taking care of animals, by the way, and going for walks in the woods, and also going for spins. And here is a sample sheet that would come back. I have hundreds of these, and they include everything from film to reading, FIFA. But up there at the top left-hand corner, there's an interesting one, create a hurley. And the word hurling and camogie are recurrent in all of our consultations, particularly in County Clare. And we've interrogated this locally, you know, why is hurling actually creative? We won't get into that today, but it's a very interesting kind of a concept. And we have to acknowledge that young people, if we're to listen to their voice, if they believe it's creative, we need to respond to that in some way. Here, very quickly, are just some programs we're rolling out this year in 2021 in response to Youth Voice. This project is called Come On. If you don't know your Irish, that means hurley. So we are hopefully, subject to restrictions allowing us, taking 4 groups to the Byrne this year in conjunction with Music Generation Clare. They will go to the Michael Cusack Centre and the ETB Outdoor Education Centre, located in a beautiful spot in the Byrne. And the young people there will have an opportunity to do painting, songwriting. They'll watch a hurley being made, and they'll also learn the coup, which apparently is the hurley haka. So we have a summer circus program this year happening in South Hill Hub. One of the consultations which we did last year was carried out by an architect, Peter Carroll, from the School of Architecture at the University of Limerick. And the young people in South Hill were tasked to give their opinions on what an outdoor youth cultural centre might look like. So that consultation had some fantastically imaginative suggestions. And this year we're starting off with a circus school outdoors at the back of the South Hill Hub. And it's going to involve a number of other local arts and youth centres. And that's going to run over 4 weeks. But interestingly, South Hill Hub is now going to work with Peter Carroll in co-designing an outdoor cultural space with young people. So the design will be with the young people. We're running a babies programme this year in collaboration with Limerick Childcare Committee, and it is based on Youth Voice. I met a woman, Mary-Therese Murray, from Limerick Childcare Committee some years ago, and one of the things that she said to me has stuck in my head since, and she said, nobody asks babies what they want. So this is a dance programme. It will be working with babies from 6 months to the age of 2. It's a rights-based approach, supporting children's non-verbal communication through movement and dance. And we have identified a really good dance artist to lead that programme, which will be rolling out quite soon. And in Clare, we're doing a similar programme leading on from the storytelling conference we had some years ago. Dee Finn is the childcare development worker here, and her ambition is to hear the stories that children are telling us through their play. We work with young children aged between 2.5 to 6 years. We've identified 2 childcare facilities on the Luphead Peninsula and a really good theatre artist to lead out on this programme. Finally, I just want to say something about the role of the ETB in helping the local creative youth partnerships to access community groups. So I mentioned earlier that I've always noticed throughout my career the kind of chasm that exists between the world of community and youth and that of arts and culture. And the training boards, I think, are just the perfect point to help the local creative youth partnerships to reach those seldom heard and hard to reach voices in their specific regions. They know where the young people are, the youth workers know where the young people at risk are, and it has really made my job very easy to work as part of a youth team in this area. And that last line there, taken from our youth plan, I think probably encapsulates the work that we are doing at the moment, our aim to do that the diversity of voices that are part of the youth population of the region will be able to find expression in the spaces where they gather. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. What struck me particularly was the wide range of diverse and really rich examples of the work that you're doing across all the age groups. And also, and I think it's been mentioned in the chat room quite a bit, was the focus on the voice of the young person in designing, I think you said, delivering and evaluating creative projects. I think also you really brought home to us the importance of letting young people define what creativity means for them. and not deciding for them. So thank you for all of that rich contribution. And thank you all. It was really, really enabling. I think I'm speaking on behalf of the audience if I say that we could spend another 2 or 3 hours just discussing and teasing out what you've presented. And unfortunately, we only have less than half an hour for the questions. And I have in front of me here a list of questions. The range of comments in the chat box is enormous. And as I said earlier, all of that's being harvested and will feed into wider consultation. But Creative Youth have a number of other questions, yes, no answers that they want you to consider. I think they're probably coming up for you now, or they should be coming up on the screen. So if you could just go yes, no to those and add comments in the box. Do you see evidence of greater inclusivity in how we provide access for young people to arts, culture, and creativity in the last 3 years? And then you can expand later. Do you see evidence, the next question, of improved integration and connectedness in the provision of for young people over the last 3 years? And finally, and this is a really important one, is engagement with creative activities and pursuits being fully utilized to support young people's mental health and well-being? So as you ponder on those and answer, I hope they've come up for you by now, let me move to our kind of question time. And as I said, I have a lot of questions here. I'm going to try to get through as many of them as I can, but I can't guarantee. And this is one, I suppose, to all of the panelists. So think about who would like to jump in first. Can access and equity only be achieved when a serious investment in youth settings takes place across this country so that all young people can access and express creativity in their local communities? In other words, are we dependent on serious investment in order to give access? So who'd like to jump in there first? Or will I ask you? Maybe it's easier. Monica.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. You have to resource it. You know, I go back to the days when I remember working in the Bell Table Theatre in Limerick in the 80s, and it was a great time for giving out free tickets, you know, to people who wouldn't normally come to see shows, you know, and there was really goodwill behind that, but it just didn't work. You know, you need to meet the people where they're at. You need to meet the young people in their settings, listen to them and follow their guide. And that takes resourcing.
Brilliant. Would the others agree? And would anybody like to add something? I see you nodding there, Rachel.
Yeah, I suppose like just in kind of relation with funding and youth services, I suppose it kind of goes back like for working like with like young minorities, and I suppose for me working with young travellers, great like having the funding, like, but if the organisation isn't like, if there's not like an open door policy like for young travellers, if they don't know the needs of like young travellers, if they don't understand like even like their living conditions, like I think it kind of goes back to like knowing like the diverse groups you're working with, knowing the backgrounds of the young people, because you could have all the funding like in the world, but if you can't work with your young people and understand their culture, like it's not going to work, you know. So I suppose funding is great, but I suppose looking at the organisational like level, are they working like from even like a social justice kind of point of view? Is it like including like everybody, and is it an open door policy, you know?
Okay, thank you. And just jumping then to a question I think which came up in a lot of your presentations as well. Somebody's making the point here, it's more a comment than a question, but I think you might comment on it. Is a lot of work needed to be done with the adult gatekeepers to ensure that children and young people can access their creative opportunities? In other words, the people that are working, the adults that are working, is there a lot of work needed with those? Maybe I'll go to you, Paula.
That's a really good question. There's a lot to consider in that. I think as adults, we may find ourselves akin to a certain discourse around childhood. You know, our own lived experience, you know, is ours. And as adults, we're a product of that. So I think there's always that piece of work in terms of meaning for children and young people, in terms of genuine facilitation of children's voice and where that's placed in action. I think there's us as adults and gatekeepers need to be able to manage our own bias and our own assumptions in any of the work that we do for and with children and young people, and to keep ourselves in check in terms of maybe adhering to a discourse of childhood that we have all the answers and we're going to, you know, pour it into all of the children, or we have all the answers and we know the right pathway for our children and young people. I think that's a very dangerous discourse to adhere to, and it in terms of gatekeeping, it would be a dangerous lock on a gate in terms of children and young people accessing being creative, living a creative life in a way that has meaning for them and is you know, that they're at the center of that. So yeah, I suppose simply the answer is yes.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, would you like to add anything to that, or will I move on?
I think just to echo what Paula was saying, is that it's a really good point that, you know, not to assume that you do have all the answers, that you do know 100% best all the time, against maybe what the young person feels or thinks. Like, you know, you really have to be flexible and meet them where they're at, and accept that maybe they might know better than you in certain situations, you know?
Yeah. Just how much work is done to think about helping young people to continue being creative as they move into adulthood? We need to see it as integral to everyday life, not just careers. Would you like to comment, Monica?
I would. I think that's really why we need to base a lot of the work in community settings. You know, while it's really important to integrate it through the education system, what happens when education stops? You know, I think the smaller scale, the child-led, the kind of confidence build that accompanies community-based creative work is going to build resilience in a child, and I think that will sustain through adulthood. And quite often you actually find in a community setting that the parents come along with you. You know, if you're doing a youth program, you know, if it's something that goes on in a theatre, the audience will come from that region. So it's really about a foundation and confidence building, because there is a very strong heritage and culture in the communities that we're talking about here. Somewhere along the line, through our social engineering has broken that kind of right to express oneself in whatever way one likes, and maybe a delineation between what is regarded as high art and, you know, folk art, and all of those kind of different siloing. I think there's a lot to be contested there, but really, I think it's to build the confidence of the individual in their own personal creativity and culture.
Yeah, but there's a question here which is again kind of linked to some of the things you've just been saying. In one of the presentations, a Creative Ireland family was referenced. But families, by definition, can be bounded by shared values. Can we reach those, and this is about the question of exclusion and equity, can we reach those who don't feel they belong to the creative family, and how? Maybe Monica?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was me, mea culpa. Like I do find, I mean, obviously I'm going to sing the praises of the local Creative Youth Partnership, but I do find the entire movement of Creative Ireland and Creative Youth refreshing, in that it is open to the citizen to decide what their culture is. So yes, I mean, you know, it is a family, but it is a new kind of an acceptance, I think, really.
Yeah.
You know, the incorporation of wellness, the incorporation of what we don't maybe usually include in our definition of art, you know, blending it into heritage, into the technical spheres. But it is like there is an overarching vision. It's very broad, but I think it is inclusive. It's inclusive of it's inclusive of what anybody believes creativity to be, which is an unusual place historically in my lifetime.
Okay. Just maybe moving, Paula, to you in relation to kind of music generation. What about this concept of the family and how you include everybody in that family? What's your kind of experience, or do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I suppose there's something in this around, a culture of creativity, a national culture of creativity, and the permission to be there, and the frequency of being there, and facilitating that for children, young people, families, their communities very, very regularly. I think if a child or a young person or a family or a unit is to move into, beyond any of our services, and make choices for themselves around living, creative and expressive lives, and whatever that might mean for them, that needs to be something that they encounter really regularly and really safely, the whole way through their life, from the time they're born, without judgment. It speaks to what Stephen was saying earlier about his own experience with youth theatre, without judgment, in safety, being allowed to be whoever you need to be within that space. And for me and for us in Music Generation, I suppose the way we seek to build that culture of musicality, and a musical life and musical citizenship, for all of those who work with us, is around the frequency and the regularity of this being a part of the day-to-day life, the day-to-day community. For me, I suppose communities don't stop and start in terms of a child or a young person. Their life, is ongoing, and we would hope to be there with them really, really regularly in that creative space, and enabling all of those around them to be there with them and share in that joy, as a way forward into adulthood.
Great. Rachel, can you talk about that notion of the creative family, and where you see are the challenges and the difficulties about making that real for the people that you work with, and for a lot of others who are marginalized, and who are discriminated against in different ways?
Yeah. So I suppose really within traveller community families, big, it's the concept, your families, there's the external family that's there. But I suppose trying to bring creativity into young travellers' life would be difficult, because I showed some stats earlier, a lot of our young people don't even make it to third year. So I think even within the culture, some young people get to an age and they marry young, and the lads go off working, So I suppose trying to keep them engaged in creativity would be difficult. And even secondly, with the young people, I suppose I mention it all the time. I think a young person is an onion. You need to peel back the layers. You need to see what's going on for them, And I find this as well, in schools and education, there's so much going on externally outside school for them, whether if it's living conditions, COVID, poor health, poor education. For me, even trying to get them to engage sometimes in education can be difficult, because all this is going on in the background, and we want to do creativity, we want to do amazing things, but again, for me, it's just acknowledging all this stuff is going on in the background, and it's about meeting the young person where they're at, and it goes back to relationship building, meet them where they're at, and go on that creative journey with them, and I think for marginalized groups and different cultures that have different identities and different ways of living, yeah, they get sometimes to a point where creativity can't go on and on. But I suppose for barriers, I wouldn't see culture as a barrier. I kind of tell my young people embrace their culture. Some young girls get married young, and that's okay, that's their choice, and it's their culture and it should be accepted. And it kind of goes back to what you said, Catherine, at the start, the right to culture and the right to equity, So I suppose I suppose barriers it's kind of there's so much going on the outside, it's hand holding. So for me, it's just a relationship building, meeting them where they're at. And if I can continue creativity with them into adulthood, so be it. But I suppose even looking at the traveller community here in Cork, and even the women's groups and stuff, I love the reads that you mentioned, Monica, because the women and young girls here, they make Christmas reads, they paper flowers and stuff, So even though like there may be a cut-off point like for young people, even like the adults in the community, there's always like creativity, and the young people even gets on board, even like say for Traveller Pride, like that's a big event every year. There's adults, children, everybody gets creative. There's always amazing projects and stuff there, you know. So I suppose, yeah, it's kind of like 50-50, you know, because you need to accept our culture. If they stop and like become adults earlier, that's okay too. But if we can carry it on into adulthood and like do stuff the way the women's groups are doing now, we'll do that as well, you know.
Okay. Look, I mean, there are loads more questions, and we're not going to be able to reach them all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you the results of the polls to the questions that were asked. I think this could be interesting, and you might take those results on board in your wrap-up comments, because each one of you is going to have 2 to 3 minutes to say what you want to say to the audience and to the policymakers. So if we take our first question, do you see evidence? I think it is. Oh no, I just have to move back here. Sorry, I am obviously just picking these up as we go along, so forgive me. First of all, are you familiar with the role and work of creative youth? So 60% are, 61%, and 39% are not. This is from our audience. But you know, this is interesting. It tells us, you know, I suppose it's some kind of reflection on maybe a broader perspective or a broader view. Is engagement with creative activities and pursuits being fully utilised to support young people's mental health and well-being? Yes, 11%. No, 89%. Do you see evidence of improved integration and connectedness in the provision for young people in the last 3 years? Yes, 66%, but no, 34%. And do you see influence or evidence of greater inclusivity in how we provide access for young people to arts and culture? And yes, they see evidence of greater inclusivity, 77%, and no, 22%. So with those stats and those kind of images in your heads, maybe, I'm going to invite you in the order that you started to just give us some concluding comments. And I will ask you to really focus them in on just very brief, maybe 2 minutes each or less. Thank you. Starting then with you, Paula.
Thanks, Catherine. I'll be less than 2 minutes. So I'm wondering, can we take the results of the poll and our questioning and everything we've learned here today and think about what all that means for us and what it means for children and young people, and what that would look like in post-COVID world in terms of a recovery plan for children and young people where creativity is placed at its core. That's my final thought.
Brilliant. Rachel.
Yeah, so just kind of like looking at the polls, you know, and I was kind of alarmed with the mental health and everybody answering no for 89%. So I suppose like creativity, and I suppose really in the times that we're in COVID, the impacts it has like on young people, like being out of school, like their social, their emotional, their physical even, you know, like creativity, like with like young people and mental health. And I suppose as well, like for working like with young minorities like that are disadvantaged and aren't accessing youth services. I think like creativity and moving forward, like with this, like it'd be amazing like for the young people, and it would like make more inclusive like spaces for the young people, because like I suppose in some the youth services and stuff like that, like with young travellers and stuff, there's that kind of fear, and they're even their identity, do they need to hide who they are or not, you know? So I suppose like looking at the stats and like making the point, like, yeah, we need to like look at like do more creative spaces. We need to look at mental health, the impacts on it. So yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Rachel. And Stephen?
Yeah, I think that same result caught my eye there, the 11% feeling that I think it was their mental health is being and their needs are being met. And I think now, especially in the climate that we're in now, we've seen the result of what's happened when those young people haven't been able to come down to us, when they haven't been able to engage, and when some people haven't had the technology even or the access for the online. So we know that it's needed, we know that it's required, and we know that they're feeling it when it's gone or it's taken away. So it just needs to be even more so now, it needs to be supported. And as we grow back into coming back together, it needs to be supported and just held and just made available and resourced as much as possible. Because there is a hunger for it there is a need for it there, and there's a huge benefit for it there as well. So it's very important.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. And Monica, coming to you now.
I think, going back to youth voice, not to be afraid to actually seriously follow the voice of the young person. In almost every situation where I have consulted, their requests are tiny, and they're actually very, very doable, except where one boy wanted to build a cultural centre, the only access to which would have been through an underground swimming pool. I said we couldn't really do that. But for the most part, young people want small and tangible activities. And what they want enormously, Rachel, you touched on it, is space. They want a space to hang out, but I think they want space here. I think that's what they're talking about. I remember one little boy who was in the hurling thing, and I said to him, how can hurling be creative? What does it do for you? And he just put his hands up to his head like this, because they're so crammed. They're programmed from morning till night between school and after school. And when they go to their youth club, observing their activities in the youth club is a pleasure. It is family-like. It's like a second family. For some of them, it's their only family. So I think spaces where they can just be, listen to them, reward the cultural institutions who are genuinely engaging with young people on their terms also, and resource youth workers further to allow them explore creativity in their practice.
Thank you so much. So in conclusion then, can I just maybe try and pick up one or two things that I've observed from today's conversation, today's discussion, and from just having quick looks at the comments in the audience. I think each of you have really richly shared experiences of work that is really impacting on the creativity of young people and making such a difference to their lives. You have also identified that there is a need for further investment, for more resources, for us to listen more to the voice of the child and the voice of the young person in making decisions about how to do future programming and further develop the work that's happening in creative youth. I think you've acknowledged as well, and all we have to do is look at the audience, just the wide range of cultural organisations and of government departments and of individual artists and of youth organisations. The level of commitment and interest at a level of value and principle to the concept of really creating creative opportunities for young people and of trying to include all people in it. So I suppose our ask today then would be that this vital work that Creative Youth is doing, that it continue. And that when we meet, as we all will meet again, at the conference in May, on the 13th of May, and I know you're all going to register for it, that we will be able to speak to the voice of power, because it's going to be addressed by our senior government ministers, and we'll be able to show them from the work that's been carried out in the last 2 webinars and from the voices that we're going to hear about the young people, that this work is vital, that it's not an add-on, and that our job is to try to integrate it into every setting where young people are, whether it's in the school, whether it's in the community, whether it's marginalized, that everybody is included and that there's equity for all. So I don't think there's much left for me to say except thank you to a number of people. I want to thank Tanya and Stephen, who quietly in the background, as you know, today, but not in the background for the rest of the year, have been managing to make this happen. So I want to thank them on your behalf. I want to thank them as well for inviting me to be host. It has been a really rich and wonderful experience for me. And I want to thank Verve, who have managed us all through this whole process of sitting with each other virtually in not easy circumstances, but I think we've all managed it very well. So farewell, stay safe, go out now and enjoy the sunshine, and I hope we'll all meet again. Thank you.